What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here again today for another season review. We are almost up to modern day. One more video after this one. And I'm happy I'm getting this one out today because preseason started yesterday. We're having games. The Hawks don't start for a little while. I think about 4 or 5 days from now. So I'm not too worried about finishing one more video after this. We're coming to the end of the series. Not the last season, but the season just before, 2022-2023, also known as the Great Tank for Bedard season. To start off, I'm wearing my Vegas Golden Knights jersey. Well, one of my 6, and this is my Mark Stone one. The C's on the other side. Got Mark Stone on the back there. And so the season in which everything kind of went right for me. The Hawks got Bedard. Vegas won a cup. What else did I need in this season? Colorado wins the Central Division at 51-24-7, 109 points. Dallas 47-21-14, 108 points. Minnesota 46-25-11, 103 points. Winnipeg 46-33-3, 95 points. And now that I'm looking at it, I did not mark off which teams made the playoffs the previous season and which teams did not. So let me grab my marker real quick, which is, of course, on the other side of the board, and now it fell on the floor, because that's the luck I have. Anyway, move this back into position. So let's see, what year is it? 2022, 23. So Seattle makes the playoffs for the first time, so we'll mark that off. Vegas is back in the playoffs, so we'll mark that off. Calgary falls out, and St. Louis falls out. Nashville falls out. Winnipeg goes back in. So that's 3 in, 3 out. Then the East, that's the same. Devils come in. Penguins are out. Caps are out. And the Islanders are in. Alright, there we go. That was easy. So yes, everyone above the playoff line in the Central. You got 4 teams there. Make sure my head's in the frame a little bit. Let me move this over a bit. There we go. That should make it a little easier. Nashville just out of the playoffs, 42-32-8, 92 points. First time they missed the playoffs in a while. St. Louis 37-38-7, 81 points. Arizona 28-40-14, 70 points. And Chicago 26-49-7, 59 points. I was screaming at the TV every game to lose this game. I remember doing BFRs. A lot of my titles were stop winning, especially at the start of the season when they had a good start. But yeah, I wanted Bedard, and I was willing to do anything to get him. In the Pacific Division, Vegas goes 51-22-9, 111 points. They're back in the playoffs. Edmonton 50-23-9, 109 points. I remember taking them to win the Stanley Cup that year. LA 47-25-10, 104 points. Seattle 46-28-8, 100 points. They went from 60 points to 100 points in one season. Pretty good. Outside the playoffs, Calgary, their consistency shows. They fall right out because they missed the playoffs by 2 points. 38-27-17. This team could not win in overtime. Neither could Dallas, neither could Minnesota, neither could the Rangers, neither could the Flyers or the Penguins. A lot of big numbers of overtime games this season. 16, 17, 14. Wow, I didn't realize that. Vancouver 38-37-7, 83 points. Of course, this was the start of the one where Bruce Boudreau started the season, and then Rick Tocchet took over. San Jose 22-44-16, 60 points. Anaheim 23-47-12, 58 points. They finish last. They don't win the lottery. They do get Leo Carlsson, though, which is a good consolation prize. Boston has a historic year in the East. In the Atlantic Division, they lead 65-12-5, 135 points. Of course, we all know how this ends, but 65 wins in an NHL season, unheard of. 62 was the max before that. 3 more wins, 4 more points than the highest total ever. For a Boston team that had 2 of their best players retiring in Bergeron and Krejci, and a team that was just old. They weren't really young. They were more on the older side, and I really couldn't explain why they were winning games. Toronto 50-21-11, 111 points. 24-point gap, I think, if I did my math correctly. 24-point gap between 1 and 2. Tampa Bay 46-30-6, 98 points. Florida, after winning the President's Trophy, falls off 42-32-8. Speaking of President's Trophy, let me put the P next to Boston. Outside the playoffs, Buffalo misses the playoffs by 1 point. Buffalo fans, I'm so sorry. 42, 33, and 7, 91 points. Ottawa, 39, 35, and 8, 86 points. Detroit, 35, 37, and 10, 80 points. Montreal, not as bad as the previous year, but still pretty bad. 31, 45, and 6, 68 points. In the Metropolitan Division, Carolina leads that one as usual. 52, 21, and 9, 113 points. New Jersey comes out of nowhere. 52, 22, and 8, 112 points. The Rangers, 47, 22, and 13, 107 points. The Islanders, 42, 31, and 9, 93 points. Outside the playoffs, you had the Penguins, who missed the playoffs for the first time since 2006, I believe. 40, 31, and 11, 91 points. Hawks beat them on the second in Game 81, screw them over, and Florida gets in because of that, and then Florida goes on a run. Washington misses the playoffs for the first time in a while as well. 35, 37, and 10, 80 points. The Flyers, 31, 38, and 13, 78 points. That's 31, let's think. 62 plus 13 is 75, so that's 75 points. And Columbus, 25, 48, and 9, 59 points. People expected them to get better, not worse. In the playoffs, Central Team 1, Colorado plays wild card 1, Seattle. Seattle upsets Colorado in 7. Huge shock. Colorado, the defending champions, and a second-year team takes them out. C2, Dallas beats C3 Minnesota in 6 because Minnesota can't win a round. P1, Vegas, and wild card 2, Winnipeg. Winnipeg takes game 1, but Vegas rattles off 4 straight wins to beat Winnipeg in 5. And then P2, Edmonton plays P3, LA. We know how this ends. Edmonton won in 7 the previous year. They win in 6 this year. And we'll get to next year. In the East, A1 Boston has a 3-1 series lead on the wild card 2 Florida Panthers, who they finished 43 points ahead of. Florida wins 3 straight, including 2 in overtime. I remember that Game 5 Linus Ullmark turnover. Game 7, Verhaeghe gets the winner. Game 6 was a phenomenal game. And Florida wins that series in 7, and the President's Trophy winners go home early. Toronto, A2, finally gets it done against A3 Tampa. They win in 6. The series didn't go to 7. That's why they won. M1 Carolina plays wildcard 1 Islanders, and Carolina wins that in 6. And the New Jersey Devils, M2, surprisingly beat M3 the Rangers, even though they were the higher seed. A lot of people took the Rangers to win that series. The Devils win that series in 7. What made me mad is the Rangers won the first 2 games of that series, and then the Devils won 4 to the next 5 because the Rangers forgot how to play hockey. In the second round, wildcard 1 Seattle takes Dallas C2 to 7. I was really rooting for Seattle in that series. I wanted an all-expansion conference final, and unfortunately we were 1 game from getting that. And then P1 Vegas plays P2 Edmonton. Vegas wins that series in 6. I'm feeling pretty good about my chances at this point. I'm a little worried about Dallas, but overall, I think whoever comes out of the East, Vegas can beat. So, because Vegas is my team, when the Hawks are not in it. Wildcard 2 Florida beats A2 Toronto in 5. So, any semblance of getting out of the first round, hey, we finally did it since 2004. Yeah, that was ended pretty quickly once Florida went up 3-0. M1 Carolina and M2 New Jersey. Carolina takes care of business quickly in 5 games. In the conference final, C2 Dallas versus P1 Vegas. Vegas wins that series in 6. They went up 3-0 that series. Dallas wins games 4 and 5, but Vegas ends up winning game 6. I want to say it was like 6-0. Was it something like that? Wildcard 2 Florida and M1 Carolina. And the whole thing about Carolina is that they don't win in the conference final. They won the Cup in 2006. 2009, they lose in 4 straight in the conference final. 2019, they lose in 4 straight in the conference final. So guess what happens against Florida here in the Wildcard 2 Florida Panthers? Well, they lose in 4 straight in the conference final. So Carolina, to this date, 12 straight conference final losses over 3 rounds. Of course, Game 1 almost goes to the last seconds of the 4th overtime with Matthew Tkachuk. Matthew Tkachuk gets the winner in Game 2, I believe only 3 minutes in overtime this time. Game 3, I believe Sam Reinhart gets the winner in a 1-0 win. And then Game 4, Matthew Tkachuk does it again. He scores with like 13 seconds left in the 3rd period to give Florida the win in Game 4. Carolina is out. So, sets up an interesting final, a final that a lot of people thought was rigged. P1 Vegas, 6th year in the league, and Wildcard 2 Florida hadn't been into a final since '96. So here we go. Game 1, Vegas wins 5-2, and then they win 7-2 in Game 2. So they have a 2-games-to-none series lead. As a Vegas fan, I wasn't rooting against Florida. I really admired what they did in this playoff run. So I wasn't rooting against them, but I was rooting for Vegas. Florida wins Game 3 in overtime back in Florida. They win 3-2 in that one for Hagee with the winner in there. Game 4, Vegas goes up 3-0. Florida scores 2, and I really thought Florida was going to tie the game. I really did. I remember I was at my friend's, I think it was a friend's graduation party, I want to say. Yeah. I believe I was at a friend's graduation party watching the game, and I thought Florida's going to come back and win this. But Vegas holds on. They win 3-2, and then they go home in Game 5. 9-3 victory for Vegas. That Game 5 was one of the games of all time. I know my Mark Stone here had a hat trick. People are going to talk about LTIR and stuff. It's not against the rules, therefore I really... Is it a bad rule? Should it be allowed? Probably not. Is it a rule, though? No, you can't get mad over something that's not it's explicitly said in the rule book. In the playoffs, Eichel, 22 games played, 6 goals, 20 assists, 26 points. He leaves Buffalo, he wins a cup. Common theme with the Florida Panthers also this year. Jonathan Marchessault, my guy, 22 games played, 13 goals, 12 assists, 25 points. He ends up being your Conn Smythe winner. I also wanted to point out Matthew Tkachuk, who in 20 games, 11 goals, 13 assists, 24 points. He did not play in Game 5 due to a broken sternum. Mark Stone, 22 games played, 11 goals, 13 assists, 24 points as well. Rope Hintz in 19 games had 10 goals, 14 assists, 24 points. Adin Hill goes 11-4 with a .932 save percentage. And by the way, Adin Hill took over for Laurent Brossoit because Logan Thompson was down. Brossoit was the backup. He gets hurt. So it's Adin Hill going in. So they're on their third-string goaltender, and now he's their starter. And I believe they had a couple more goaltenders. They had Jonathan Quick on that team as well. So a couple of guys get Phil Kessel, Jonathan Quick getting third Stanley Cups. A lot of guys getting their first. Eichel I don't know who thought Eichel was going to get a cup before McDavid, but here we are. He also has 2 shutouts and a 2.17 goals against average. Sergei Bobrovsky took over. Alex Lyon was the starter coming into this. And then Bobrovsky takes over after Game 3 against Boston. He goes 12-6 with a .915 save percentage, 1 shutout, and a 2.98 goals against average. Bobrovsky came back this playoffs. His contract was looked like as an albatross. He came back this playoffs. He earned his money. And then the entire 2023-24 season, he once again earned his money, making him worth that $10 million. Is he still worth that $10 million? If they win another cup this year, probably. If not, I mean, it wasn't worth the contract, but they had to overpay for Bobrovsky. So, oh well. In terms of award winners, the Art Ross goes to who else but Connor McDavid with the greatest scoring season we've seen in 30 years. 64 goals, so he makes Matthews 60 look like amateur work. 89 assists, 153 points for the Edmonton captain. The Masterton goes to Chris Letang of Pittsburgh, who I believe had a stroke that year and lost his father. So Letang went through a rough year. The Calder goes to Matty Beniers of the Seattle Kraken. I have his jersey. The Conn Smythe goes to Jonathan Marchessault of the Vegas Golden Knights. I have his jersey. The Selke goes to Patrice Bergeron of the Boston Bruins, who ends up retiring after this season with David Krejci. The Hart goes to who else but Connor McDavid. The Jack Adams goes to Jim Montgomery of the Boston Bruins because you have to. The Norris goes to Erik Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks, who has an 100-point season. The Lady Byng goes to Anze Kopitar of the LA Kings. The Clancy goes to Michael Backlund of the Calgary Flames. Ted Lindsay Award goes to Connor McDavid of Edmonton because who else? The Messier goes to Steven Stamkos of the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Rocket to Connor McDavid with 64 goals. The Vezina goes to Linus Ullmark, who went 46-1 with 2 shutouts, a .938 save percentage, and a 1.89 goals against average. 40 wins of the 65, so that means Swayman was in for the other 25. The Jennings goes to, it'll share between Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman of the Boston Bruins because, of course, if they had 65 wins, they probably ran away with that. In terms of all-star teams, the first team goes to Jason Robertson, who had a really good year, Connor McDavid and David Pastrnak up front, Adam Fox and Erik Karlsson on the back end with Linus Ullmark in net. The second team all-stars go to Artemi Panarin, Leon Draisaitl, and Matthew Tkachuk up front, Cale Makar and Hampus Lindholm on the second pair, and that is Ilya Sorokin in net. On the all-rookie team, you had Matias Maccelli of the Arizona Coyotes, Matty Beniers of the Seattle Kraken, Wyatt Johnston of the Dallas Stars, Jake Sanderson of the Ottawa Senators, Owen Power of the Buffalo Sabres, and Stuart Skinner of the Edmonton Oilers. So overall, biggest surprise of these all-star teams has got to be Lindholm. That's not someone you usually expect to see, but he's a good defenseman. Okay, free agency. A lot of free agents. We're getting into the era of there's a lot of free agency and a lot more players in the league because there's more teams in the league. So we'll start with this side of the board. Actually, we'll just go across. Zarnik goes to Detroit. Gillies goes to Arizona. Matt Benning to San Jose. Henrik Borgstrom to Washington. Dylan Strome to Washington because all the Hawks players just wanted to go to Washington. Michael Hutchinson to Vegas. Alex Lyon to Florida. Andre Schuster to Minnesota. Phoenix Copley to LA, who would be huge that next year. Nicholas Amon to Vancouver, Jack Campbell to Edmonton. We all know how that contract ended. Nick Patan to Minnesota, Nick Delorier to Philadelphia, Johnny Gaudreau to Columbus. This was the first player to choose Columbus and got his life taken from him. Hayden Fleury to Tampa Bay, Kyle Capobianco to Winnipeg, Martin Furk to St. Louis, Jordy Ben to Toronto, Marcus Nudavaro to San Jose, Josh Archibald to Pittsburgh, Cale Clegg to Buffalo, Marcus Johansson, I believe that is to Colorado. Marcus Johansson to Colorado. Claude Giroux to Ottawa. Ilya Samsonov to Toronto. David Perron to Detroit. Dominic Kubalik to Detroit. Martin Jones to Seattle. Drake Caggiula to Pittsburgh. Victor Mete to Toronto. Brad Hunt to Colorado. That is Scott Harrington to San Jose. Calvin DeHaan to Carolina. Nathan Beaulieu to Anaheim. That is Aaron Dell to Toronto, Jimmy Vesey to the New York Rangers. Up there, of course, Derek Brassard to Ottawa, Anton Strawman to Boston, Sonny Milano to Washington, Mark Stahl to Florida, Tyler Pitlick to St. Louis, Ben Harper to the Rangers, Alex Galchenyuk to Colorado. Wolanin goes to Vancouver, Ryan Strome to Anaheim, Nico Sturm to San Jose, David Rittich to Winnipeg, Eric Stahl to Florida, Ian Cole to Tampa Bay, Brendan Smith to New Jersey, Eric Gustafson, another Blackhawk to Washington, Andre Burakovsky to Seattle, hasn't played a lot of that contract, Andre Kasha to Carolina, Andy Walensky to the Rangers, John Hayden to Seattle, Kelly Yarncroke to Toronto, Zach Sanford to Nashville, McEachern to Carolina, Chris Tierney to Florida, Matthias Janmark to Edmonton, Michael Delzato to Florida, Nino Niederreiter to Nashville, Will Butcher to Dallas, Michael Kempney to Seattle, Robert Hagg to Detroit, Paul Stastny to Carolina, Phil Kessel to Vegas. That is Sam Steele to Minnesota. I actually can't read. Sam Gagne to Winnipeg. Andre Palat to New Jersey. Mark Pysyk to Detroit. Ryan Carpenter to the Rangers. Dylan Sakura to Chicago. Josh Levo to St. Louis. Matthew Highmore to St. Louis. Aaron Dell to San Jose. Kiefer Sherwood to Nashville. Mark Jankowski to Nashville. William Lagesson to Carolina. Sam Carrick to Boston, Keith Kincaid to Boston, Brett Seeney and Luke Philp both to Chicago, Magnus Hellberg to Seattle, Justin Braun to Philadelphia, Chase Prisky to Buffalo, Colin Miller to Dallas, Jan Ruda to Pittsburgh, Erica Branson to Columbus, and in a very bizarre contract, Justin Schultz to Seattle, Curtis Lazar to Vancouver, Carter Rooney to Calgary, Laurent Dauphin to Arizona, Abe Kubel to Toronto, who'll be put on waivers and end up in Washington. Vinny Trocheck to the Rangers, Andrew Copp to Detroit, Ilya Lyubushkin to Buffalo, Troy Stetcher to Arizona, Wyatt Kalnick to Vancouver, Only Mata to Detroit, Athanasiou and Domi both go to Chicago, Mikheyev to Vancouver, who's now also in Chicago, Comrie to Buffalo, Halak to the Rangers, no, that's to the Rangers, that is to the Rangers, Colin White to Florida, Nick Bukestad to Arizona, Frank Vetrano to Anaheim, Ben Sherratt to Detroit, Dustin Tokarski to Pittsburgh, Alex Stalock to Chicago, who just retired, maybe do a career video on him, Darcy Kemper to Washington, Gilbert to Calgary, Marchment to Dallas, Blackwell to Chicago, Cousins to Florida, Lindblom to San Jose, Domingue to the Rangers, Bowie to Montreal, Podorowski to Seattle, Achari to St. Louis, Lindgren to Washington, Pickard to Edmonton, Joshua to Vancouver, Grice to St. Louis, Nemestikov to Tampa Bay, Delia to Vancouver, Gaudette to Toronto, Greer to Boston, Josh Brown to Arizona, Stenlund to Winnipeg, Vinny Lettieri to Boston, Kevin Lankinen to Nashville, Evan Rodriguez to Colorado, who's down there, Ryan Dzingel to Carolina, and I got to actually move the board a bit so I can read these. Ryan Murray to Edmonton, Evgeny Svechnikov to San Jose, Buddy Robinson to Chicago. I can't actually tell what that's. Oli Ulevi to Anaheim. Jeez. John Klingberg to Anaheim. Riley Sheahan to Buffalo. That's Jack Johnson to Chicago. Cole Gutman to Chicago. Nazem Kadri to Calgary. Chowalski goes to the Islanders. Fashion goes to the Islanders. And Tyler Mott goes to Ottawa. So that concludes all of free agency. So I'm going to pause here and I'll pull up all the trades that went down this season. And we are back. So to start off, July 7th, 2022, Colorado acquires Alexander Georgiev for a 2/3 and a 5th going to the Rangers. July 7th, the Hawks trade Alex DeBrincat to Ottawa for a 1st, 2nd, and a 3rd. July 7th, Montreal trades Alexander Romanov and a 4th to Montreal for a 1st. Montreal then takes that 1st from the Islanders and sends it to Chicago with a 3rd for Kirby Dach. Chicago then gets Peter Mrazek and a 1st for a 2nd going to Toronto as they're in full blow this up mode. Arizona gets Zach Cassian a 1st, a 3rd, and a 2nd for a 1st going to Edmonton. Detroit gets Ville Husso for a 3rd to St. Louis. New Jersey gets Vanacek and a 2nd for a 2nd and a 3rd going to Washington. Tony DeAngelo and a 7th go to Philadelphia for a 4th and a conditional 3rd, I want to say, going to Carolina. San Jose gets Luke Cunnin. Nashville gets John Leonard and a 3rd. Ottawa gets future considerations for Toronto's getting Matt Murray, a 3rd and a 7th. Minnesota gets Philip Gustafson. Ottawa gets Cam Talbot. Boston gets Pavel Zacha. New Jersey gets Erik Haula. Carolina gets Brent Burns and Lane Peterson. San Jose gets Steven Lorenz, Eetu Makiniemi, and a 3rd going to San Jose. Patrick Nemeth and a 3rd go to Arizona for Ty Emberson going to the Rangers. Carolina gets Dylan Coghlan and Max Pacioretty for literally nothing going to Vegas. Connor Brown goes to Washington for a 2nd-round pick where he barely plays. John Marino goes to New Jersey for a Ty Smith and a 3rd going to Pittsburgh. Montreal gets Mike Matheson and a 4th for Jeff Petrie and Ryan Poehling going to Pittsburgh. Seattle gets Oliver Bjorkstrand for a 3rd and a 4th to Columbus. And then a big deal here. Calgary gets Jonathan Huberdeau, Cole Schwindt, Mackenzie Weegar, and a conditional 1st going to Florida is Matthew Tkachuk and a conditional 4th. That was a deal that shocked the world. And then Calgary gets future considerations. Montreal gets Sean Monahan and a conditional 1st-round pick. San Jose gets a 4th-round pick. Vegas gets Adin Hill on August 29th. That one hurts for San Jose. Kulikov goes to Anaheim for the future considerations going to Minnesota. Lundqvist goes to Dallas for a conditional 1st going to the Rangers. October 7th, Jason Dickinson and a 2nd go to Chicago for Riley Stillman going to Vancouver. Hawks win that one going away. Edmonton gets Klim Kostin. St. Louis gets Dmitry Surukov. Edmonton wins that. Montreal gets Nick Beaudin, who's a failed experiment in Chicago, for Cam Hillis going to Chicago. Don't know who that is. Boston gets Michael DiPietro and Jonathan Myrenberg for Jack Studnicka going to Vancouver. Carolina gets a 5th-round pick for Ethan Bear and Lane Peterson going to Vancouver. Minnesota gets Ryan Reeves for a 5th going to New York. Arizona gets Curtis Douglas for Connor Timmins going to Toronto. Colorado gets Dennis Malgin. Toronto gets Dryden Hunt. Detroit gets Michael Del Zotto. Florida gets Giovanni Smith. Anaheim then gets Michael Del Zotto, and Detroit gets Danny O'Regan. Colorado gets Ryan Merkley and Matt Nieto. San Jose gets Martin Kuit and Jacob McDonald. January 30th, the Canucks make a big move. They decide to keep JT Miller, and they trade Bo Horvat to the Islanders for Anthony Beauvillier, who ends up in Chicago, Aatu Raty, who's a pretty good prospect, and a 1st-round pick going to Vancouver. Jacob Megnan of Seattle for a conditional 4th going to San Jose. The Rangers get Nico Mikkola and Tarasenko for Sammy Blais, Hunter Skinner, and a conditional 1st going to St. Louis. Minnesota gets, in a 3-way deal, Minnesota gets Ryan O'Reilly, St. Louis gets Josh Pillar. Minnesota then takes a 4th-round pick because they're taking some of the salary for Ryan O'Reilly, who goes to Toronto. St. Louis gets Mikhail Abramov, Adam Gaudette, a 1st and a 3rd and a 2nd for Nola Chari and Josh Pillar going to Toronto. The Rangers get Tyler Mott for Julien Gauthier and a 6th going to Ottawa. Arizona gets Shea Weber and a 5th. Vegas gets Dyson Mayo. That's Shea Weber's contract. Chicago gets Nikita Zaitsev, a second and a fourth for future considerations going to Ottawa. Josiah Slavin to Anaheim for Hunter Giroux going to Chicago. Minnesota gets some salary again. They hold on to part of Dmitry Orlov's contract for Andrei Svechkov going to Washington. Then Boston gets Garnet Hathaway and Andrei Svechkov. Washington gets Craig Smith, a first, a third, and a second. And then Boston gives Minnesota a fifth for the rest of Orlov. So that's how that three-way deal worked out. Boston gets Shane Bowers. Colorado gets Keith Kincaid, as my voice is starting to disappear. Vancouver gets Vitaly Kravtsov, who never worked out at the NHL. The Rangers get Will Lockwood in a seventh. Winnipeg gets Nino Niederreiter. Nashville gets a second. Dallas gets Evgeny Dadonov. Montreal gets Denis Gurianov, so a couple Russians being traded for each other. St. Louis gets Vegas' first-round pick that year, Zach Dean. Vegas gets Ivan Barbashev. Chicago gets Andreas Englund. Colorado gets Stanley Cup champion Jack Johnson. And then we have a pretty huge deal between New Jersey and San Jose. I think there were 13 things in this trade. New Jersey gets Zachary Amond, Scott Harrington, Sateri Hatkata, Timur Aberbrigov, Timu Meyer, and a fifth-round pick. San Jose gets Andreas Janssen, Shakir Mohammedullin, Nikita Okahotiuk, Fabian Zetterlund, who looked pretty good in San Jose, a conditional first, and a seventh going to San Jose. So that's the Timu Meyer deal. Tampa Bay drinks the stupid juice. They get Tanner Jeannot for Cal Foote, a first, a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth. I don't know what Tampa was thinking there. Chicago gets Joey Anderson, Pavel Gogolev, a conditional first, and a second from Toronto for Sam Lafferty and Jake McCabe, with a conditional fifth going the other way as well. Buffalo gets Riley Stillman, Vancouver gets Josh Bloom, Carolina gets Jesse Puljujärvi, Edmonton gets Patrick Puistola, Anaheim gets a third, San Jose gets Henry Thrun, Minnesota gets Marcus Johansson, Washington gets a third. So that means I don't think that Colorado guy is Marcus. That's Jonas Johansson. That's who that is. I apologize to Jonas Johansson. Toronto gets Eric Gustafsson in a first. Washington gets Rasmus Sandin, which is a very questionable move even now. The Islanders get Pierre Engvall. Toronto gets a third. And then they sign him to a 7-year deal. Toronto gets Luke Schenn. Vancouver gets a third. Edmonton gets Matthias Ekholm in a sixth. Nashville gets Tyson Barrie, Reed Schaefer, a first and a fourth. Minnesota gets Gustav Nyquist. Columbus gets a fifth. And then the Chicago makes the trade that breaks my heart, but it had to happen. So in a three-way deal, the Hawks get Vili Sararvi, and Arizona gets Patrick Kane. Then Chicago gets Andy Welinski, a conditional second, and a first. No, just a conditional second. The Rangers get Cooper Zesch. Then Arizona gets the conditional third, and the Rangers get Patrick Kane. So the Hawks end up getting most of the picks. Arizona gets, I think, a fourth in there, along with the Rangers also get Cooper Zesch, and they also end up with Patrick Kane. So Kane goes to the Rangers. In March, Jonathan Quick, a conditional first, or I think this becomes up so Jonathan Quick, a conditional first, 2 seconds and a third for Vlad Gavrikov and Jonas Korpisalo go to LA. Colorado gets Lars Eller, and Washington gets a second. Of course, Quick refuses to report to Columbus. Detroit get for a first and a second, get Philip Hronik and a fourth to go into Vancouver. Arizona gets a third for Shane Gostisbehere going to Carolina. Ottawa gets Jacob Chychrun. Arizona gets a first, a second, and it's not, I think, a first and 2 seconds if I'm reading this right. Vegas gets Teddy Bluger for Pittsburgh, getting Peter Liberatore in a third. San Jose gets Vlad Namestnikov for Mikey Acimont going to Tampa Bay. Nashville gets a second. Pittsburgh gets Mikhail Granlund, which they regretted. Boston gets Tyler Bertuzzi for a first and a fourth going to Detroit. Arizona gets Voracek's contract and a sixth for John Gillies going to Columbus. And then Michael Hutchinson and a seventh go to Columbus for Jonathan Quick going to Vegas. Buffalo gets nothing for Anders Bjork going to Chicago. Arizona gets Michael Kesselring and a third going to, and then Edmonton gets Nick Bukestad and Cam Dineen. Hawks get Anton Hudobin, who is a Blackhawks legend, along with a second-round pick in 2025 for Max Domi and Dylan Wells. St. Louis gets Jacob Vrana for Dylan McLaughlin and a seventh. New Jersey gets Curtis Lazar for a fourth going to Vancouver. Zach McEwen goes to LA for Brendan Lemieux and a fifth going to Philadelphia, which was weird because Brendan Lemieux and Zach McEwen are pretty much the same exact player. Nemestikov then goes to Winnipeg for a fourth going to San Jose. Montreal gets Bonino and a fifth for Arvid Hendrickson going to San Jose. Montreal then flips Bonino to Pittsburgh in a three-way deal with Pittsburgh and San Jose. Buffalo gets Jordan Greenway for a second and a fifth to Minnesota. Buffalo gets Austin Strand for Chase Prisky going to Anaheim. Calgary gets Dryden Hunt for Toronto's Radim Zahorna, or Toronto gets Radim Zahorna. Minnesota gets Oscar Sundqvist. Detroit gets a fourth. Ottawa gets Patrick Brown. Philadelphia gets a sixth. Austin Wagner goes to Chicago for nothing to LA. Ashplin goes to Nashville for a seventh going to Buffalo. The Ritchie brothers are traded for each other. Connor Mackey and Brent Ritchie go to Arizona for Nick Ritchie and Troy Stetcher going to Calgary. Minnesota gets John Klingberg for Nikita Nesterenko, Andre Schuster in a fourth. Brock McGinn in a third go to Anaheim for Kulikov going to Pittsburgh. Anything else of note? No, that would be it. So, yeah, that concludes today's video after 10 minutes of trades. A lot of big deals that year, a lot of three-way deals because the cap was supposed to be going up and it didn't. So that is why a lot of the contracts being signed are small, because teams at this point cannot take, the salary cap isn't going up and for another year, and so teams cannot take those big money deals. They can't make those big hockey trades because the salary cap's not moving and you can't add money if there's no money being added to your account. So I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. One more season left, the 2023-24 season, and I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.